Alright, so in this video I'm just going to go through a bunch of stuff. I've only been getting into tension recently and just trying things out and trying to learn stuff, and I found that there's a lot of things either in the manual or in videos I've watched online that have told me stuff that I then tried to implement. It's turned out kind of not to be true, or it's turned out to be quite different from how it was described in the manual or on the various videos I've watched. And so I've done a lot of investigation. I've done a lot of debugging where I've used images of the states that I'm putting characters into so I can see when they're chasing or shooting or whatever. And I've done that to try and help me write better AI, where I know actually what state the enemy is in or what they're doing or how they're behaving, which you know, as much as I'm using the same sprites for all my characters, you can see in this scene I've got some enemies that just keep moving around while attacking me. I've got this enemy who's kind of got a shotgun, who's always trying to close the distance and get as close as possible, and I've got these sniper enemies over here who really don't want me to be able to get close to them, and they'll run away if I try and close the distance, and they'll shoot me a lot. So I've got these different behaviours going on, which I was really struggling to do from what I had read in various guides and manuals online. And so I'm going to dive into a whole bunch of stuff, and hopefully it's useful and you get something out of it. Alright, so common misconception number one is that every time you write a script, and this is something you're going to see in the game's manual, it's something you're going to see in various tutorial videos online, is that every time you get to the last line of a state, you need to put ready. So in this video, everything finishes ready. I forgive Mikulu, they're just totally copying out of the game's manual. The game's manual puts ready at the end of every state. If you don't, if you just put none, it doesn't make any difference whatsoever. The only time you need to type ready is the one frame before the enemy attacks. So if you put ready here and then attack on the next line, then they will attack. If you don't put a ready here and you put none, they will attack once the first time, and then they'll still play attack animations again, but it will never do any damage or launch a projectile. But you only need to put it right before you then use the attack action. Other states, putting ready at the end of these does absolutely nothing. You don't need to do it. I've saved this state here. Let's run it. Still shoots, still deals me damage, still behaves in exactly the same way as if you wrote ready at the end of those states. If it makes you happy to write ready at the end of those things, knock yourself out. But you absolutely don't need to do it. It just seems like a weird practice to put it there when it's not a thing you need to put there. Okay, thing two is a thing that really confused me for quite a while. In the game's manual, if you look at the intermediate FSM for enemies, you get multiple states with the same name. So you'll see that in this intermediate FSM for enemies, there is a state that's called C that goes to chase. Later on, there is a state that's called C that goes to flee. There's also a state that's called flee that goes to C, and a state that's called flee that goes to chase. Now, this kind of baffled me, and then later on when I was trying to find out more about how FSM works, and I was on YouTube, there's this video by Artificially Inked where he writes this mouse script for mice that run away, and it has a state called C flee and a state called C chase, and when he's describing it he says,
or flee, so they'll run away, and then they do flee, and then they'll look for me again, and when they see me again they'll actually chase.
So kind of implying that they'll flee and then somehow they will look for me again, and then if they see me they'll chase. So I tried to replicate this, and I could not get my head around how the engine knew the difference between this state that's called C and this state that's called C, because the state is not called C flee and C chase. The second name here, the chase here and the flee here, just defines what state this state should go to if it reaches the end. So if I have none, the state will just loop forever until a command inside the state tells it to change. If this doesn't say none and it says something else, then when this state reaches the end, it'll go to the state defined here. But if I have two states, both called C, how does the engine know which one I'm talking about? So I made a little test for this. I replicated the mouse script. Here we go, mouse, and he's in the level. And let me just open it up so we can look at it. So here we go. We have idle, we have C flee, we have flee C, we have C chase. So we have two versions of the C state. And then to kind of make it easier to visualize what's going on, let me just go into the project files, AI testing, sprites, enemies, the mouse. I labeled these states. So idle, C flee, flee C, and C chase. And so you'll see that I've defined these frames. So C flee will go to frame 1, flee C will go to frame 2, and C chase will go to frame 3. And these are 1, 2, and 3. So now in the game we will be able to see which state the character is in at any time. So let's run it, have a look. And what we'll see is that it goes from flee C to C flee, but it never goes to C chase. Never ever. Doesn't matter what you do. And that's because, as far as I can tell, if you put two states with the same name, the engine will only ever use the first state that has that name. Any other state after that that has the same name will just be ignored. And so this is not only true of this mouse AI video. So this C chase state, this second one, never ever gets called. The engine goes from idle. As soon as it sees the enemy, idle is interrupted by C state, which is a special quality of the state that's called C. And at the end of these two frames, it goes to flee. And it flees, and at the end of the fourth frame, after these have played, it then just goes to C state, and it goes back to this state. It never ever goes to C chase. It also will never chase you because there is no state called chase defined here. So even if it went to this C state, we haven't got a state called chase for it to do, so it'll never chase you. I can understand why this happened, because if you go to intermediate FSM for enemies, there's this intermediate FSM listed here, which obviously, as I said, includes multiple states with the same name. So again, let's take a look at that. I made this character called manual test. A manual test is testing out this script that we see in the manual. Let's go here and check it out. I did the same kind of thing for this enemy. I copied the Boris intermediate enemy script from the manual. The only thing I've changed here, obviously the Boris intermediate script in the manual uses many frames of animation. I've used a lot less and I've simplified it. You can see where I didn't bother to change death because I'm never going to kill him in this example, so these still have the mega frame numbers, but basically I've just used 16 different frames of animation, but everything else about this is the same. We keep the same names. We have C chase and we also have C flee, we have flee C and we also have flee chase. So we have two states that are duplicated. We have two C states and we have two flee states. And I've done a similar thing here. So my theory is that the only C chase that will run is this C chase, and the only flee chase that will run is this flee chase. These two states at the bottom are both duplicating the C and flee names, and I don't think they will ever run. So you'll see that this one has animation frame 16, and this one has animation frame 14, and it's for a character called manual test. So over here in the project files, frames 14 and 16, I drew crazy green outlines over the character. So if it ever goes into those states, we're going to see it really clearly because he's going to suddenly sparkle. And just so we're aware, right, he goes into idle. When he sees you, idle is interrupted by C, and at the end of C, it'll go to chase. Chase will, if it reaches the end, go back into C state, which will just wait a tiny bit of time, and then it will go back into chase, and it will loop through these forever unless it gets close enough to you to trigger attack, and at the end of attack, if attack happens, it will then go back to chase, which will then loop. So we basically only ever go between these states unless I shoot him. If I shoot him, he will flee, and then I don't really know what the person intended this to do because two of these states have the same name, but as I'm going to demonstrate, it never uses these two states anyway. So let's run it. So I'll run it. I made a default gun. It doesn't have an animation, but I've picked it up now and I can shoot with it. So here we go. C chase, attack. C chase, attack. Chase, C chase, attack. Idle. Let's shoot him. He's hurt. He runs away. Flee C. C chase, attack. Chase, C chase, attack. Runs away. Flee C. C chase, attack. So as you can see, we get flee C and we get C chase, but we never get C flee and we never get flee chase, which are these two animations here. We never saw this frame, flee chase, and we never saw this frame, C flee, with these outlines. And that's because they have duplicate names. So these two are ignored. Whenever it gets called on C, it always goes back here. Whenever it gets called on, whenever flee gets called, it goes down here. And because these are duplicates, we never call them. So, word of warning, if you're trying to write your own scripts, if you're watching people's tutorials, if you're getting things out of the manual, bear in mind there are a lot of things out there, be that the game manual or other people on YouTube, giving you scripting advice that says you can kind of go flee C to C flee to flee chase. You can't. Each state must have a unique name. Now, you could make this do the other states. You could say hurt flee goes to flee, seen, and seen goes to fleen, I guess. And then, because they all have unique names, if we run it now it will see chase and he'll attack, and he'll chase and he'll see chase and he'll attack and he'll idle. If I shoot him, he will then run away and flee see, and then he will see fleen, and then he will fleen chase. But it only works if they have unique names. So be very wary of any tutorial or any file that's giving you scripts that contain states with the same name. They don't work. They don't do what people think they do. Okay, so the next thing is this C test, right? And this is kind of looking at how C, the state called C, works, and some kind of common misconceptions about it. So we're going to look at this really simple script. We've got state idle and it just loops forever, so really it should only ever stay in idle. But if I run it, what we'll obviously notice is that as soon as they pop out, the guy goes to C. And so what we can infer from this, right, is if the enemy is in idle state, the first time that the enemy then sees the player, state C can interrupt that and it will go to C state, which I've currently got set to hold for 5 seconds, which is why it just says C for 5 seconds. But what's interesting there is, like, idle is a state that can be interrupted by C. So I did another little test because I was interested. If at the start of the level, idle state automatically goes to another state called chillin', right? So basically before the enemy has ever seen the player, the enemy is going to change state from idle to a new state that's just called chillin'. So let's save that. If I then go run this, to wait that 1 second for that state to change over, if I come out, he is now in chillin' state, and we can see that he just stays in chillin' state. And although I've got this C state here, it did interrupt idle when I ran it, but now that we've changed to chillin', it doesn't interrupt chillin'. And so, like, what we can infer is that, like, C is a special condition where it can interrupt idle, but it can only interrupt idle the first time the enemy sees the player. After that, it'll never interrupt it again. So if I actually change C state so that C will wait 5 seconds and then it will change back to idle again, and I save that. So he's in idle state. I pop out, he sees me, I pop back in again, and we like wait a little bit, so we'll give him a moment. So he should have gone from his C state, he's now probably changed back into his idle state again. If I pop out, he doesn't switch back to being in C state again. So what we can learn from that is that idle can be interrupted by C, but it will only be interrupted by C the very first time that the enemy sees you. After that, it just becomes like any other state that you could define yourself, like deciding or chilling. It has no special abilities. It's not looking for the player. It's not raycasting to see if the enemy can see the player. It only works that very, very first time that the enemy sees the player. So you need to be really careful. Basically what I'm saying is you could almost, instead of calling it C, call it activate. It's a special state that activates the enemy out of their idle state into this first state of C the first time they see you. After that, if you want to figure out if the enemy can see the player, you should be doing something else to do that detection, because C is not actually doing anything for you. So what do you do if you want the enemy to be able to detect if they can see you after that first C out of the idle state has already been triggered. Well, so let's modify this a little bit so we can see how that works. At the moment, as I just kind of demonstrated, at the moment he's gonna see me, and then after a short amount of time he's going to transfer back into his idle state, and then we can tell from this, look, he can not see me and then he sees me again and so on, but that C state never re-triggers and he's just now stuck in idle, the poor guy. So if we actually wanted to make it so that he could see us, we'd have to do something like this. So we're in the idle state, it'll automatically trigger C, which will come back to the idle. We will then, we're going to copy this line here. We're going to make it last a lot shorter. I'm actually in the Alpha 59 version of the engine, so I can define stuff as being 0, but if you're in one of the older versions that you get off itch.io, it's got to be slightly longer, so I'm going to make it 0.1 for anyone who's not on the latest version or whatever. To do, we need to do set a variable, so we're going to do set var, and we're going to set a variable called canC, and we're going to set that variable to player visible, which will return a 0 if they can't see the player and a 1 if they can see the player. So that variable canC. And then what we're going to do is we're going to say jump if equals. So in idle state they're going to jump to a different state if canC equals 1, and we're going to jump to chilling. So what this should do is they're going to be in idle state, they will jump to the C state the first time they see you, that will run out after 5 seconds, and they will go back to the idle state. In the idle state, after that, it'll never trigger C again because it's happened once, but if they can see the player, then it should jump into state chilling, and then they'll just be stuck in chilling forever. So let's just check that that works. So pop out, he can see us. We'll go back in here, we'll let that state change. We'll pop out, he's in idle, he sees us, he changes to chilling. So we've managed now to have a second sight detection after the first sight detection. If we wanted to, obviously in chillin, we could then copy this in a very similar way. So in chillin, we could also set the variable canC to find out whether the player is visible, but this time instead of jumping when it's 1 when we can see him, we could jump when it's 0 so we can't see him. We could change back to idle. And because we've got this like 1 second frame here and 1 second frame here, we should hopefully when we test this again be able to see this little bit of delay before he changes states so that we can see them switching back and forth. I hope. I haven't tested this, but we'll try it. So he sees us. We hide away again. Now hopefully he should change back to idle state now while he's not seen us. So we pop out, he goes from idle to chillin, which is great. And he'll just stay in chillin state until he can't see us. And we pop out, he goes from idle to chillin. And so now we have an enemy that actually can figure out when they can and can't see us. And this is without using C state at all once we get past that initial activation. But I would say that this is a much more reliable and effective way of detecting whether you can see the enemy. Because if you're just trying to use C state over and over again throughout your FSM, it's not actually doing anything. It's just changing to a state called C, which will then run through. This is a much more reliable way of doing it. So hopefully that was useful. Alright, so the next thing to look at is like how flee state works. Very similar to how chase state works, but chase state's a bit more complicated. So let's cover flee first, and hopefully once you've heard this and grasped it, because you're an intelligent, genius human, then when we start talking about chase, it's all going to just make perfect sense. So we've got this guy called Scared. Scared's got a really simple script. He starts off in idle, and as we know from the previous seminar, lecture, whatever you want to call it, as we know, idle can be interrupted by C. And so the first time he sees us, he's going to go into C state. For 2 seconds, he's going to point at us and say, I see you, because that helps us identify the state he's in. And then after that, he's going to go into the flee state. And flee has no exit state. So it's just going to loop these 4 frames over and over and over again. So let's just look at that just to make sure that I haven't messed anything up. Here we go, he says, I see you, and then he's going to flee. And this dude's going to flee forever. Like, we haven't given him another state to go to. And so flee doesn't actually have like an end to it where it will automatically change to anything else. He will just run away. There's some interesting weirdness with this in that he tries to pathfind like directly away from us, and he'll kind of get stuck in corners and things. But what it means is actually if I get close to him, sometimes he'll have to move towards us to run away again. So maybe it's easier to not necessarily think of it as flee as just being like you've turned movement on, and they're going to do their best to move away from you. But at times it's going to mean they have to move towards you to get away. Anyway, he will just flee forever. Where it kind of gets weird and interesting, and where there's like space to do some interesting behaviors, I think, is if we start to look at how flee affects other things. So, what we're going to do this time is he's going to go into flee state, he's going to play these 4 frames, but then instead of looping them forever, he's going to go to a new state called chilling. So, let's look what happens. We walk out, he sees us, he flees from us, and then he goes to this new chilling state. But even though he's changed states out of flee, he's still moving. He's still doing the flee behavior, even though we've changed him to doing something different, right? He's now in flee, he's now in chilling state, but he's still moving, and he will continue to move forever. I mean, obviously he's just got himself stuck in a corner, the silly Billy. But yeah, he will just remain in this state all the time. Which can be annoying, right? Imagine we wanted to make an enemy who like runs away while shooting at us, or like he runs away until he stops and shoots at us. If we had flee and then like we had a state called shoot, we want him to run away for a bit and then we want him to shoot at us. If we do this and then he'll shoot, what will happen is he'll keep moving. There are only certain states that can stop the enemy from moving. Those states are idle, hurt, and attack. And so what's interesting, right, is if we then change this to be idle, I'm actually going to double the number of frames that he runs away for, because otherwise it's going to be really, really short. But if we change this to flee idle instead of flee chilling, what we'll notice is he does actually stop. So if we run out now, he'll say, I see you, he'll flee, and then when he gets to idle state, it'll make him stop. And so this is kind of useful, right? Once we understand that the like states that aren't idle, like if we create our own state and call it like chilling or whatever, the enemy will flee, and then if we change to chilling, they'll continue to run this like movement behavior while doing whatever we've put in the chilling state. Whereas if we actually want him to flee and then stop and do something else, we have to change back to a state, like an engine defined state, like idle. That's kind of useful, because if we want an enemy to run away, we could have like a state called like run and shoot. And so the enemy would see us, run away from us, and after they've run away for 8 frames, they would then go to their run and shoot state, where they could be shooting, but it would still be running that flee logic in the background. So they'd run backwards while shooting, and at some point during run and shoot state, you can change the idle and you can make them stop, and then they can go and do something else. I found this really confusing initially. I couldn't understand why if I had a state called flee and flee made them move, if I changed that out of the flee state, they kept moving. But it's almost like if you activate flee state, you're just putting them into movement state, and only like idle and whatever can like turn the brakes on and make them stop again. But hopefully that's useful to know. I've done some examples later on in like the more advanced enemy combat AI that can show how that works. In fact, I might end up cutting this bit. Whatever. I will cut to that now, and I'll show you how that guy works, because I think it's kind of helpful. So this is a guy called Scaredy Sniper. Let's put him into the level, Scaredy Sniper. So Scaredy Sniper, when he sees us, will shoot at us from a distance, like this. And if I try and close the distance to him, when I get near enough, he will run away, and he'll run away shooting until he gets to a safe enough distance to then just stop and start shooting at me again normally while standing still. And if I try and close the distance, he will run away while shooting, and then once he gets back to that safe distance again, he'll stand still and start shooting again. So this is kind of cool. Like, we can create enemies that are like more orthogonal, right? They will try and keep a specific distance either towards or away from us, and this is like exploiting how the flee state works. Okay, so this is just the last bit of the video, and we have this test guy, right? And this test guy is set up with the default script that you would get from here, the basic FSM for enemies script that comes with the manual. And so if we just run that and have a look at it, then what we see is he's idle, he'll attack, he'll chase, he'll attack, he'll chase, and so on. And he'll basically keep doing that, right? If we go out of view, then he's just going to chase us, and then he's going to keep attacking us, and so on and so forth, forever and ever and ever. And this is like fine. But basically what we end up with is this enemy that like he's just stuck here. He will always end up getting as close as he possibly can to the player. And we don't have a lot of control. Like if we wanted to make an enemy that stayed further away, we can't do that. If we want to make an enemy that basically comes into a certain attack distance and stops and shoots but doesn't get any closer than that, we can't do that either. And we can't do that for the following reasons. If we look at their script, we know that C can interrupt idle the first time the enemy sees the player. So we know that we're in this idle state. It'll get interrupted by this C state, and C will go into chase. But we can also see that in chase state, we don't define that we go into attack. If we take out all of this, and we just have idle, and then when they see, they'll chase, and we run this. Alright, they're idle, now they're just going to chase us. Come on, chase me, Gary. So he's going to chase us. What's interesting, right, is when he gets close enough, he'll go into idle state. So even though in here we don't tell it, we just tell it to loop chase forever, he'll go into that idle state when he gets close enough to us. So the problem with chase and the problem with attack is there's a lot of stuff going on underneath the hood that you don't have any control of. You don't control when the game chooses to change from chase into attack. You don't control that chase will automatically go to idle when they get within a certain distance of the player. And you don't get to control how all these things interact. So we're quite limited in what we can do with enemies. And so how do we solve that? I guess that's the question here, right? That's the question I was banging my head against a wall trying to figure out. And so I'm going to propose that one thing you don't want to do is you don't actually want to use attack state for enemies that are going to attack with ranged weapons at least. You should just use your own. So let's call it shoot. State shoot. This is going to create some problems because if I was just to say state shoot and then in my chase state I move my keyboard so it's not bumping around. In my chase state I add some new commands like this and I do that and then I say set var distance and I do player distance and then I say frame for and I'm going to do jump if equals dist, oh wait no, jump if less, so I will go over what all this means in a sec. Jump if less 250 shoot. So what this will do, right, is it will idle, it will get interrupted by C, C will go into chase. Chase state will run. And chase state doesn't go anywhere, so it will continue to loop until he gets to the player, but it's constantly going to set this variable distance to the distance between the enemy and the player, and if that distance is less than 250, it'll change to shoot state. Let's just save that and see if that gives us the behaviour that we want once we've closed the pre-existing game window. So he's in idle, he's going to go into chase state. And now he's changed into that shoot state that I defined, but he hasn't stopped moving. A little bit like flee state. He's now stuck in chase, and like it does the weird thing where the pathfinding gets stuck in the corner. So it looks like he's decided to stop, but he hasn't. He's just trying to pathfind in a diagonal line. I've got 4 seconds here worth of animation, so I'm actually going to just reduce this animation time to 0.2 so we can see this happening a little bit better. Okay, so we've got idle. It's going to get interrupted by C and go into chase. Chase is going to run for 0.8-ish seconds, at which point it's going to, every 0.8-ish seconds it's going to check the distance between the enemy and the player, and if it's less than 250 it will change into this shoot state where they're going to shoot. Now this state is like a proper real us-defined state, and so we've told it to go nowhere, so the game will get stuck in shoot. It'll just keep looping through this over and over and over again. Let's run it now that we've got less of a delay once it gets into the chase. So now we are attacking, and they're just going to keep shooting. And kind of what you'll notice is they tried to pathfind to where I was at the point at which they went into state. They didn't find me, so now they're just bouncing around shooting, which is pretty cool. We kind of got a strafing enemy. If we actually get close enough, he might stop. But no, he's just stuck. And he's not actually in attack state, right? Like just the name of the frames. He's in that shoot state that we defined, but he's moving around forever. And we don't really want him, I mean, maybe we want him moving around forever. We could animate his legs and it would look like he was just running around shooting us and strafing, which is maybe pretty cool, but he's just stuck doing that now. Until he enters hurt state or idle state. So, what if we wanted him to actually stop? Well, a little bit like flee state will just, even if you're in flee and you change to a different state that isn't idle or hurt, they will just keep moving. This is the same thing. If you're in chase state up here, and you change out of chase state using a jump statement into a new state that isn't idle and it isn't hurt, they'll change to this state. They'll run the actions that are going on in this state, but they will keep like doing the pathfinding and moving around in the scene forever, because there's nothing in shoot that tells them to stop. It's obviously something going on under the hood. I can't explain it because I don't know the code base, but like that's what's happening, right? You're leaving chase, you're going into shoot, and even though you've gone into shoot state, they keep moving. So what we need to be able to do is we need to put them into idle state. If we could put them into idle state, when they get within 250, they would stop, and then we could make them shoot. And so let's try doing that. So we have this chase state, and instead of jumping to shoot if it's less than 250, let's jump to idle. So they're going to go there, they get within 250, they're going to go to idle state. So there's obviously more to do. This is going to break it, but let's at least try it. So they're going to chase us, and then he got within 250, and now he's stopped. He's gone to idle state. But the problem is that we can't just copy this line frame and tell it to go into shoot state here, because he starts in idle, right? Like idle is what he's in when he starts the game. And so instead we're gonna do some new things. We're gonna start in idle. When we go into this C state, so as soon as he sees the player, the first time he sees the player, and he goes into C state, we're going to do set var, and we're going to set a variable called scene, and we're going to set it to 1. Actually, let's use something a little bit more evocative. Let's say alerted. So he's idle. The first time the player gets seen, he's going to go into C state, and he's going to set this variable called alerted to 1. And then obviously at the end of this state he goes into chase. So he chases us, he gets within 250 and he gets sent back to idle. But now he's back in idle. Sorry about that. Now he's going to go back into idle. But in idle now we have a new variable we can check. We can say jump if equals alerted 1. And so this will only jump out of the idle state if he has already been through C and chase and got within distance and then come all the way back up to idle. And what we're going to do if it equals that is we're going to move to a new state, and we're going to call this state deciding. And state deciding is going to work like this: state deciding, and it doesn't go anywhere, it loops forever. And we're just going to reuse the frame 0 for a minute. Actually, for clarity, let's create a new frame that makes it really obvious what's going on. So I'm going to duplicate this frame, and I'm going to rename it frame 13. And I can't be bothered to type the word deciding, and so instead of that we're just going to put this little thought bubble over his head with a question mark in it, and that's going to be frame 13. And so now we'll load 13 frames of animation, and then when we go into state deciding we'll play frame 13 for 0.1 seconds, right? Now while we're in frame 13 we are going to while we're in this deciding state, we are going to get the distance from the player again. So again, we're going to check the distance. Whoop. And if the distance is less than 250, so if they're within that thing that we want them to attack with, then we're going to shoot. And if they are greater, so if they're more than 250, if the distance is greater than 250, then we're going to chase. And then what we're going to do in our shoot state, so it will shoot and it will go through the state, and in the end, it'll go back to deciding again. And so this deciding state gives us a way of changing through things, right? We're going to enter, we go into idle. It's obviously going to check if alerted is 1, which at the beginning of the game it won't be, so it'll ignore it. So it's just going to keep looping through this doing nothing until it sees us. When it sees us, alerted gets set to 1 and it goes into chase state. In chase state, they're going to chase us until either we run up to them, which will trigger idle state, but they're alerted, or they're just going to get within 250 of us, in which case they'll go back to idle as well. When they hit idle state, this time alerted is 1, and so instead of looping forever, it'll get here and it'll jump out to the state we've created called deciding. Now deciding stage is going to loop forever, but it's definitely going to hit one of these two things, right? It's going to set the distance to the player, it's going to get the distance to the player, and it's going to set dis to that value. And then that value is either going to be less than 250 or greater than 249. And so it's always going to end up leaving this deciding state and either going to shoot or chase. I hope. So let's run it and see how that works. He's going to run up. He's going to go to idle, he's going to think, and then he's going to attack. And he's going to keep going between shoot and decide, shoot and decide, shoot and decide, shoot and decide, until I get further than 250 away. And then he'll keep moving until he gets within 250, and then he'll shoot and decide, and so on. Now obviously he doesn't really care if he can see me or not, he only cares about distance, but it'll still kind of work, right? If I move out of range, he's going to move around until he gets within 250 of me, because he's going to end up in that chase state. But he'll never get closer. Unlike the other attack states that you can end up with in the engine, like, this is going to be his attack distance. He's going to stay at this distance all the time. And this kind of lets you make maybe some more interesting enemies. Like, this guy doesn't want to get super close to you, he's always going to stay mid. If we wanted to make, like, imagine a shotgun enemy, for example, we could change all these values. We could change the 250 to be, like, 90, and this would be 90, and this would be 89. And if I save that, and then we run it, then this guy is going to be a guy who wants to get really, really close to us, and he won't do any shooting animations until he's super close, and then once he's super close, he's going to do attacks. Obviously we can change these values where he changes over to idle, and then he does the thinking. You could make the think frame super short, so he's snappier, but I'm trying to like let you see that you can actually see when that deciding thing happens. And so yeah, now we've got this enemy that's always going to try and close the distance to us. Except for this weird bounce. I have no idea how to control that. It's part of chase state. They hit things, they move around. But yeah, so we have way more control using this technique over the distances at which enemies will engage us. And obviously from earlier in the video I showed you how to do things like check if the enemy can see you or not, and so forth. So you could basically make it that if I stay within 250 of them and I move around the corner and he can't see me, he would also check if he could see me and then still chase me. But yeah, hopefully this explains some things that I found really complicated and I couldn't find answers to in other videos. And in general, if you're making ranged enemies and trying to write AI, I would highly recommend not using attack and using your own shoot states, because it gives you way more control over when the enemy will leave chase and move into a state where they're attacking you and then move back again. Hope it's been helpful. I'm sure it's gone on way longer than anyone's attention span and no one's seen this far, but thanks. Okay, so just to round this up, using all those techniques that I've shown you, I'm going to just show you a couple of demonstration enemies that have different behaviours that can kind of make for interesting gameplay. So this first one is just called Guy. He's basically the guy from the last demo that I showed you, so he will see you, he will try and get within a certain distance, and then he'll basically like fire a shotgun kind of weapon with a spread. And so he's always trying to close this distance. If you get too far away, then he will close in and shoot. That's his whole thing. So he's not super interesting, but like he is different from the default behavior. The next enemy is this running, shooting enemy. So this guy's kind of more like he's supposed to like harry the player. So he will see you and he will run towards you, shooting a weapon, and he'll just keep bouncing around. If he gets too close, he will then try and run away from you while shooting a weapon. And so basically, he'll like stay within a certain distance of the player, but he never stops moving. So he's always either running towards you shooting or moving away from you and shooting. But he won't stop. But he won't just run away crazy. He will run away within a set distance. I can actually pop out, show you that, run and shoot. So you can actually define this, right? You can keep the distances between here and then the distance greater. So you can basically specify an inner radius and an outer radius, and he'll stay within those two whilst attacking you. Which is kind of like not that different from using chase and flee in just a bunch of attack states, but if you do that, you don't have any control over how far or how close they'll get. It's just being triggered by the engine. This guy, you actually have full control over that. And then the final guy that I did here is called Scaredy Sniper. So let's put Scaredy Sniper in, and Scaredy Sniper, he will shoot you from long range, and he'll just keep shooting like this. And if I try and close the distance to him, he will run backwards shooting, and then once he gets to a safe distance, he will then keep just shooting at you from that point again and again. If I try and close the distance, he will run away and he'll shoot a bunch of shots, and then once he's like within a further away distance, he will start shooting again. I will say with all these characters, like the art is not polished and the timings as well are not polished. So like when I move in here, there is this delay before he decides to move away. Like all of that could be tweaked. You could make all these things faster, but this is more just showing the concept. And again, like the other character, if we look at the script, it's not just kind of triggering flee. Like he has this shoot state, he still has like a deciding state like the other character we went through, his flee state and then his flee shooting state. I think we looked at this one earlier on anyway, but these guys kind of, you have a lot more control over the distances at which they'll engage the player, when they'll run away, when they'll re-engage the player, and so on.